Hello, in this video, I will tell you 7 stories about 7 different cases, but I want to focus on the 7 different punishments that the people in these stories receive. I've arranged them in increasing order of the severity of each punishment. The first story is about Vasilis Limberis. That's the name of a 27-year-old man. He worked as an electrician and lived in Greece in December 1971. Around this time, it was Christmas, but Vasilis was drinking alone without anyone to hang out with. After getting drunk, he went back to his apartment building and accidentally ran into some men. Then he asked them to sit down and talk. These were people who lived in the same area as him, so he knew them. But while they were having a pleasant conversation, he stood up and said something that suddenly made everyone serious, and he wanted to ask them to help him with something. After he said it, all of them said that this was definitely not okay, that it couldn't be done, but he told them that it would definitely be fine. So, in the end, they agreed to help him. Then they planned to carry out the deed, and on that day, Vasilis and 2 of them went directly to the location. The other person stayed home to plan. They drove to a gas station to fill up on gas. While there, they also stopped to buy some gasoline cans to take back with them. And that night, around 2 a.m., they went to a house. At this time, Vasilis and a teenager in the group started carrying these gasoline cans inside. When they reached the door, the teenager looked into a room. In this room, there was an elderly woman sleeping and a baby lying in a cradle. Vasilis then entered the second room. In this room, a woman and a young girl were sleeping. What he did was pour gasoline all over the room and then took out a match to start a fire. At this time, in the other room, the teenager also poured gasoline and started a fire in the same way. When the fire broke out, the woman woke up and screamed, trying to run away. But Vasilis stopped her, restrained her, pushed her to the floor, and said that she had to face the consequences. Then he immediately ran outside. A few minutes later, Vasilis and the teenager came out, but the teenager felt that he didn't want to do this. But during the argument, the house was already engulfed in flames, so the 2 of them ran away first and decided to deal with it later. Actually, Vasilis had lived in this house before, and the woman there was his wife. They were married, but when they lived together, they constantly argued and had conflicts. Besides the arguments, the elderly woman, who was his mother-in-law, also disliked him, and the 2 young children were his children. So, after living together for a while and finding it incompatible, they separated. At this time, Vasilis was angry and moved out. He moved to an apartment building, and during this time, he frequently drank alcohol and got drunk, feeling very angry and sad about his family problems. And until he met the people in the same apartment building, he planned and wanted their help to take revenge on his wife and children. After setting the house on fire, the 3 men drove to the location of the 3rd man involved in the plan. This man helped them change clothes to dispose of the evidence. When the house was engulfed in flames, someone saw it and immediately called the police and emergency services. After the fire was extinguished, they discovered that all 4 people inside the house were dead. No one survived. Shortly after, they quickly found Vasilis. Because he was the husband of the woman, it was easy to find him. They decided to carry out a punishment against him. After being in prison for a while, he was brought out for execution. They blindfolded him and took him to an empty field. Then they tied him to a post, and a group of soldiers pointed their guns at him. This was the firing squad execution. When it happened, they all fired at once. That day there were 12 people, but in reality, only half of them had bullets in their guns. This was so that when they returned, they wouldn't feel guilty, because each person thought their gun didn't have a bullet. Later, they caught the teenager who directly participated in the crime with Vasilis, and he also received the same punishment: execution by firing squad. However, after reconsideration, they reduced his sentence to life imprisonment because he might have been underage. In Greece, until 2004, they abolished this punishment of execution by firing squad, and Vasilis coincidentally was the last person to suffer this punishment. The second story is about Eugene Weidmann. This story involves a 22-year-old girl named John Coven. She was a dancer living in New York. One day, she traveled to France. When she arrived, she went to a hotel, and as soon as she entered the hotel lobby, she met her aunt. This was the reason she came there, to visit her aunt. While they were talking, a man came over and greeted them. He was a stranger. He introduced himself as Siegfried. After greeting them, he expressed a desire to take the girl on a tour of Paris because he saw that she was visiting for the first time. He wanted to take her around to see everything. After discussing it, the girl seemed to agree, so her aunt wished them a good time. That afternoon, the girl waited. The man drove up to pick her up. John seemed to like the man. They spent the whole day sightseeing and took many pictures. After a whole day of sightseeing, something happened. It wasn't until the next day that John's aunt realized that she hadn't come home and couldn't be reached by phone. Then someone delivered a letter to her, and when she opened it, she discovered something terrible. The letter demanded ransom money because they had kidnapped John. Later, she received a phone call, and when she answered, the person on the other end sounded like a man. The content of the call was exactly the same as the letter. The man was demanding ransom money. After this horrific incident, the aunt immediately reported it to the police because she didn't know how to handle it. The police tried to find the man for a long time but couldn't find any other clues. But one day, the man was going home. At this time, the police seemed to have found a clue to the man's whereabouts and raided his house. When they entered, the police saw the man's face. This man was Severity, the one who had talked to John earlier and taken her on a tour of Paris. He was holding a gun to threaten the police but was immediately subdued. Then, the police discovered that in the man's yard, when they dug up the ground, they found a body. They dug up the entire area and found many places containing human remains, not just one spot. This man's real name wasn't SF. His real name was Weidmann, 31 years old. He was a German criminal and had been to prison for minor offenses before he started murdering many people. During his time in prison, he befriended several men, and after their release, they formed a group specializing in targeting wealthy individuals, luring them into traps, murdering them, and then stealing their possessions. Therefore, when he saw John, he noticed she seemed wealthy, so he used a fake name, Secret, to approach her and succeeded. After taking her out, he brought her back to his house for a tour. During this time, he strangled her to death to steal her belongings and then dug a hole to bury her. Weidmann had murdered many wealthy people before, and John was his first victim. However, it took the police several years to find him, due to other cases, not John's. So, in 1939, in the city of Versailles, France, there was a prison called Saint-Pierre Prison. One day, in front of this prison, many people gathered to witness an event. A guillotine was brought out, and the police led Yin to it. Then the blade was lowered, instantly severing Yin's head. After his head was cut off, the police took his body away for disposal, but left his head there. At this time, the people began pointing at Yin's head and cursing him with very harsh words. They seemed very aggressive, using the harshest language to insult Yin, even though he was no longer alive. The aggression of the crowd was photographed by journalists and published in newspapers. When this news spread abroad, it significantly damaged the image of the French people. Therefore, from then on, all punishments involving beheadings were carried out in private to prevent this from happening again. The third story is about Mary Lackland. Around the 1500s to 1600s in England, there was a town called Limberis, and in this town lived a woman named Mary Lackland. From a young age, she was very poor, but when she grew up, she married a man named John. This man worked as a barber. Their life was quite comfortable, but not overly wealthy. After living together for a while, unfortunately, John passed away, and Mary became poor again until her old age. Fortunately, she received a subsidy from the parish, so she could still make ends meet. At this age, when Mary went out, she was always irritable and cursed at everyone. Therefore, many people disliked her. In addition, although she received a subsidy, she still frequently borrowed money from others to live on. So some people lent her money, and some didn't. For example, one day when she met a woman named Jennings and wanted to borrow a household item, Jennings said no, simply because she didn't want to lend it. That was Mary's daily life until something happened. One day, while she was walking in the neighborhood, a group of men approached her. This group of men demanded that she go with them. With Mary's irritable personality, she certainly refused, but these men said that this request was mandatory and that she should kindly come with them. To a certain extent, they had to force her and take her away. They took her to a room and then went in to interrogate her, asking her several questions. Around 1645, at this time in England, many people were dying from illness or experiencing misfortune. Therefore, there was a belief that these unfortunate events were caused by witches, so they were very afraid of witches, and witches often disguised themselves as ordinary women, so they couldn't be easily identified. At this time, in the town, there was a man named Matthew Hopkins. His job was a witch hunter. This was a job he took upon himself. He and his group specialized in finding strange women whom he suspected of being witches, and he had already caught several. One day, he accidentally encountered Mary and believed she was one of the women disguised as a witch. So he arrested her for questioning. While answering the questions, the atmosphere was very tense, and Mary wasn't entirely lucid. Therefore, that day she accidentally confessed that she was involved in the death of a woman named Jennings. This was the woman from whom she had borrowed something but who had refused her. So she said that she knew about magic and had used it to summon a demon. This demon scratched her hand to draw blood. After taking the blood, it followed all her requests. She simply asked it to go to Jennings' house and kill her for not lending her the item. She also asked the demon to harm a man who had demanded money from her because he had previously lent her money. and after Mary's confessions, they officially confirmed that she was indeed a witch. There was no doubt about it, and all witches were punished in the same way, public hanging. But Mary's case was special because she also confessed to causing the death of a man, who was her husband, who was also murdered by a demon. Therefore, they changed her punishment. They tied her to a stake with piles of straw underneath and then set it on fire. She was burned alive, which was certainly much more painful than being hanged. This punishment occurred because murdering one's husband was one of the most serious crimes at that time. So, compared to being a witch and murdering her husband, she received the punishment related to murdering her husband. The fourth story is about Richard Rules. In 1469, there was a man named John Fisher. He was born in the town of Beverly, and from a young age, he was sent to study at a school inside a church. John's learning ability developed very well. He was very gifted in learning, especially in fields such as theology, philosophy, and doctrine. These were almost the main subjects in every lesson. So, recognizing his talent, his mother sent him to Cambridge University from a young age, and thanks to his learning ability, he studied there for a long time until he grew up and graduated with a master's degree very early. By 1504, John had become the Bishop of Rochester and also the headmaster of Cambridge University, where he had once studied. His job was to teach subjects such as theology and doctrine to people, and he received a lot of respect from them. In 1531, John was very successful and owned his own mansion. In his mansion, he had many servants, from maids to cooks, who served him and were very close to him. One day, John had several guests over, so he asked the cook to prepare the finest dishes for them. The most special dish that day was oatmeal porridge, which he offered to all the guests. His servants also eat this porridge in their own quarters and were given plenty to eat, just like the guests. After the meal, during the conversation, one person felt severe stomach pain and asked to go to the restroom. Then another person also experienced stomach pain, so John immediately realized there was something wrong with the food and rushed inside to ask the servants why this was happening. But he saw that the servants were also suffering from stomach pain after eating the oatmeal porridge. After that, all the guests experienced stomach pain, and some even fainted. That day, 2 people died, 1 servant and 1 guest. So John gathered all the servants and cooks and asked who had caused this, or at least if anyone knew what was happening. One person accidentally saw a white powder being added to the oatmeal porridge. This person saw that a man among them had done it. His name was Richard Rules, one of the servants at the time, so he was immediately taken away by the soldiers. He was very confused and admitted that he had added the white powder, but he said that someone gave him this powder, so he didn't know anything about it. That day, everyone suffered from food poisoning and stomach aches, but John wasn't affected because he didn't eat that day. So, in London, John took Richard to an area where they tortured him and at the same time asked him why he did this. At this point, Richard confessed that he did put the white powder in the porridge. It might have been poison, but he didn't know, and his intention was simply that he thought it was just a prank. He didn't intend to harm or poison anyone, but unexpectedly, the consequences were very severe. At this time, the ruler was King Henry VIII, and he stepped in to resolve Richard's case. A characteristic of King Henry was that he was particularly obsessed with the idea of poison in food. He was very afraid of poisoning. Therefore, anyone who committed this crime would be severely punished. So that day, Richard received a very harsh punishment from King Henry. On the day of the execution, everyone gathered. That day, they prepared a pot and then lit a fire. At this point, Richard was put into it. He was being cooked alive and screaming a lot, but then he lost consciousness and gradually died. This was a truly severe punishment, and if you pay attention, you can see that because this man put poison in the porridge, he had to suffer a similar punishment. He was put in a pot and cooked alive. The 4 stories above are about 4 different punishments, but in the following stories, the victims suffer even harsher punishments, enduring multiple punishments at once, not just one. The 5th story is about Sammy Phlyer. Before I begin the story, I want to say that I couldn't find any images related to the story, so I used an AI-generated image, but the story itself is true. Around 1560 to 1580, in the Holy Roman Empire, there was a man named Sammy Phlyer. He was a weaver and quite handsome. One day, he went to a city called Marburg. While strolling around the city, he accidentally met a very beautiful girl, so he got to know her and they gradually fell in love. He then proposed to her, and her father finally agreed. The father also gave them some money as a wedding gift so they could live happily together. However, a few months later, while the two were walking in a neighborhood, they had a huge argument, which led to their breakup. After that, Sam went to another city called Millenburg, and there he met a girl. This girl was a maid who made cakes, and from the moment they met, they fell in love and wanted to get married. After they got married, one day while walking in the forest, they had a big argument, and from that day on, they also broke up. Next, Sam went to another place called Bat Morgan Time. There, he met a carpenter. When they met, they talked very friendly, like friends. But then Sam noticed a girl, who was the carpenter's daughter. He was immediately impressed by her, and they talked a lot. From there, they got married. After being married for a while, they started to return to the girl's home, because after getting married, they lived in a separate house. During their journey back, they argued a lot. This argument was so intense that they broke up in the middle of the road. After the breakup, the man went to a fourth location, Kaiser Lane. When he arrived there, he met a girl, the daughter of a very wealthy farmer. When they met and talked, they didn't get married immediately like before, but only got acquainted. However, after a short time of acquaintance, they also broke up. So, Samson went to a fifth place called New Stander Windstore. When he arrived there, he met a weaver. This weaver had a girl who was his servant. Immediately, Simon got acquainted with the girl and they got married. After a while, the weaver realized that his servant had been missing for a long time and hadn't returned, and there was no way to contact her, so he became suspicious. After the girl's disappearance, they started an investigation and discovered that Sam was not a simple man. He had been involved with 5 girls as I mentioned earlier, and he broke up with all 5 of them. But the reason for the breakups wasn't arguments, but because he murdered them and wanted to steal their money. The first girl was strangled by him in the neighborhood and then her body was hidden. The second girl was strangled by him in the forest. Then he abandoned her body there and fled with the money. The third girl, during an argument by the riverbank, was presumably pushed into the river by him, causing her to drown. The fourth girl, whom he had just met, was immediately pushed into a pit after he stole her money. And the last girl, a maid, was also murdered. But the method is unclear. Therefore, they immediately launched a rigorous manhunt for Samson and eventually caught him. Immediately after his capture, they took him to a room for torture and interrogation. He then confessed in detail, admitting to knowing 31 girls, most of whom he had married. Of these 31 girls, he murdered 19. Those who survived were only robbed of their money before he abandoned them. Because the crimes of murdering wives or husbands were very serious, in 1581 he officially received a severe punishment. First, he was hung up. Then, someone took a pair of tongs, heated them until they were very hot, and used the hot tongs to tear off pieces of his flesh, primarily to inflict pain. The next day, he had to endure another punishment. He was laid down, and a stake was driven through his body from below, piercing through his mouth. Then they took the stake out and publicly displayed it for a day. On the third day, they took his body down and chopped it into many pieces for disposal. The sixth story is about Dafydd. In 1238, Wales was divided into several kingdoms, including some large ones such as Gwynedd, Hayes, and HP. Each of these kingdoms was ruled by a prince and was independent of each other. In Gwynedd, the current ruler was Gruffydd, who had 2 sons. The elder son was named Llewellyn, and the younger son was named Dafydd. These 2 would be his successors. The particular person I want to talk about is Dafydd. He had a very persuasive way of speaking whenever he talked. Therefore, he had negotiated many times with powerful people and gained many advantages for himself and in many matters, the most important of which was land. At the same time, he was also a skilled military leader. He commanded his soldiers very well. In 1282, this is a map of England. As I mentioned earlier, Wales consisted of many kingdoms, so each kingdom wanted to be independent. But in England, there was only one king, and he always wanted them to unite the entire country, including Wales, to be ruled by only one king. Therefore, the ideologies of the 2 sides were different. In Wales, Dafydd was from Gwynedd, the king of England was Edward, and the 2 often negotiated and talked to each other. But one night, at a castle called Hawarden, which was ruled by England, a group of soldiers suddenly arrived. These were soldiers from Gwynedd. They stormed in and killed all the English guards and won completely. This was a surprise attack by Gwynedd, and the person who ordered it was Dafydd. He ordered the attack, and at the same time, he said that this would be a great war, so he wanted to invite his brother to participate as well. Both of them fought together against England. At this point, King Edward was forced to retaliate. Therefore, not long after, at a castle called Ruslan, which he also ruled, the Gwynedd army advanced and attacked. But at this time, he was prepared and had soldiers to fight back. So the 2 sides fought and a great battle ensued. During the battle, Dolphin's brother was killed, but at this time, Dolphin and some of his servants were sheltering in a safe place and did not participate directly in the fighting. And when he looked from afar, he saw that his army was gradually advancing towards him. This meant that his army had lost. When his army arrived, they tried to find him but couldn't find him anywhere. They also went to several castles and searched everywhere but still couldn't find him. And when they reported back to King Edward, he said that they must find him and continue the search. So, a long time later, when the soldiers went into the forest, They accidentally found Dolphin hiding in a swampy area and captured him. The reason for the war was that initially, Dolphin was very close to his brother because they were siblings and therefore on the same side. But Dolphin frequently contacted King Edward to demand certain privileges for himself. Therefore, this showed that Dolphin frequently changed sides and spoke in a way that only benefited himself. So both sides realized that they could not trust Dolphin and that he definitely had a problem. Therefore, later, when he was captured, King Edward decided to give him a very severe punishment because he was guilty of treason. So, on the day the punishment was carried out, they prepared a horse and tied him to it. Then they made the horse run extremely fast, dragging him along the ground, causing him serious injuries. After that, King Edward began to strangle and hang him, causing him to suffocate, but not quite to death. Then they took him down to disembowel him, removing his internal organs and intestines. After all that, he certainly died. At this point, they chopped him into many pieces for easier disposal. The seventh story is the story of Peter Niers. Around 1560 to 1570, a large group of people went to a farm where a man worked as a sheep herder, and this man welcomed the group inside. When everyone went into the house to discuss things, they then left and split into several groups. These groups had the job of immediately apprehending and killing any strangers they saw, and then stealing their possessions. They committed these murders and robberies not only in the suburbs but also in the city. All these groups did the same thing because they were criminal gangs, and the farm owner was their leader, usually using sheep herding as a disguise. One of these criminals was a very special man named Peter Niers. He was special because he had killed many people and stolen a lot of property. At one point, he even gathered his own group of about 20 people. Then they split up to commit murders and robberies. Peter was especially interested in pregnant women. He often killed many of them, because after committing the murders, he would remove the fetuses from the women's wombs and put them in a bag, treating them as part of his collection, or he would eat them. This made Peter a terrifying criminal in the area. Furthermore, he had another characteristic. He was caught several times, but when the guards weren't paying attention, he would immediately escape in some inexplicable way. Therefore, he was famous for frequently escaping. And people often explained it by saying that he used the fetal organs he collected to perform magic and then escape. This was the theory commonly put forward by the people. Around 1581, in a public bathhouse, a man accidentally witnessed something horrific. He saw someone resembling Peter Niers sitting in the bath, so he immediately whispered to those around him and tried to call for help to arrest Peter. While Peter was bathing, he had left a bag on the shore. The man approached and opened the bag, finding that inside were the internal organs of fetuses. Therefore, it was definitely Peter and no one else. Immediately after Peter finished bathing, the guards arrived and immediately apprehended him. This was the last time Peter was caught because they ensured he couldn't escape again and applied an extremely harsh punishment. First, they tied him up and flayed his skin. Then they poured hot oil on him, severely damaging his wounds. After that, they began to set him on fire. At this point, there was also oil involved, ensuring that his entire body would be burned, and as severely as possible. Then, the next day, Peter was still alive, so they applied a second punishment, the breaking wheel. They stretched his body out and tied him to a wheel, then rotated it continuously. With each rotation, his body was pressed against the ground many times. This caused both injuries and broken bones. He was subjected to this about 42 times, and after all that, the hot oil, the burning, and the breaking wheel, he was still alive. So they chopped his body into many pieces to ensure his death and to facilitate disposal. Okay? And those are 7 stories about 7 punishments today. As always, if you like this video, you can subscribe and like this video, so I can create more for you guys.